Hello and welcome to our live Q&A session for Warm Earth Lab and Food Futures. We really hope that you've enjoyed those array of weird and wonderful 3 films that you've seen this evening. Please keep those questions, comments, whatever you want to say to us coming in. Would love to hear your thoughts and feelings about what we've created so far. But let's get into it. We're going to have a very short Q&A session this evening, so we'll finish around 9 o'clock and just have a few questions for each of the groups. So let's kick it off with Warm Earth Lab. Loved it. Hello. So we had a question from Diana Drogan. Becoming a performer, how does it feel? Who wants to kick that off?
That's a very good question. I think a few of us have sort of started, exploring these this field of performance. Becca, Callum, Chris, I myself a bit. How does it feel to become a performer? It's weird at first when you start, because you sort of feel like you're tiptoeing into a field that's not quite your own. But actually this performative thinking is really interesting when you start exploring these architectural topics. Maybe Rebecca wants to add something on this, or someone else in the group.
Yeah, I'm very happy to. I'm a big advocate of bringing in performative thinking into sort of architecture and where urbanism converge. If you think about it, we perform every day. It's an aspect of life which is integral and really crucial. And it's a moment where there can be a sort of sense of a shared moment where, people, land, insects, objects, everything is connected and making sort of a shared and well envisaged moment of knowledge exchange. I think it's really important, and it can become a really useful tool for exploring architecture in the way that we perceive ourselves and the way that we perceive others in the city, and how this sort of visually and physically manifests. It's great. Go out, go and perform.
Nice, thank you. Yeah, I have to say, even though it's not necessarily obvious that our architecture profession is kind of performers, you did it so well. Okay, we have a next question from Gilly. Where are the criteria drawn from?
Yeah, I can respond to this. So yeah, we essentially translated the criteria for UK citizenship across to the context of a landscape. So, for example, the first criteria is quality of character. So you're kind of asked to denote your sort of criminal history and then sort of nominate referees. So we sort of took that framework and then applied it to a landscape. How would that manifest in a landscape? So you might have to kind of declare a history of environmental violence and then sort of declare how that's then been kind of mediated and nominate some referees to perform for you, which were the performers in the video.
Yeah, I thought it was quite an interesting approach. I think it was something we all quite developed along with this kind of interaction with warm data, and it falls hand in hand with environmental personhood. So how do you represent a landscape in a way that it might be able to redress actions from a polluter? And it's this kind of enactment of citizenship that kind of begins to represent a landscape in a way that maybe moves beyond the metric.
Yeah, and building on that, sort of the qualifications that we were finding to become a sort of legal stated person in countries are often about what you can bring, like skill-wise or economic-wise. So we wanted to subvert that and look at what are alternative value systems, like more esoteric or emotive or emotional data, rather than sort of the metric, hard-hitting, quantifiable or codified data that you usually find in these systems of becoming a person or getting status in a country.
Yeah, and maybe a quick note to the audience: if you have any sort of precedents or architectural projects that you want to share with us, just drop it in the chat. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that was maybe my next question as well, pulling on some of the comments. Eat Your Veggies, great name, says, reminds me of Miyazaki's film Spirited Away, where one of the main characters is, spoiler alert, Spirit of the River. Jake asked, where do I get one of those side caps? So could you tell us a bit more about your inspiration for the material in the film? You had kind of these weird and wonderful objects appearing, multiple scales showing on a screen. So tell us about your inspirations.
Yeah, I think I think part of the concept for the piece was that we wanted to sort of expose a value system which operates around less productive means, or which kind of orientates around things other than pure kind of productivity and efficiency. And I think part of that was then constructing this world which kind of drew on some sort of like shamanistic aesthetic, which could then, I guess, kind of suggest like a sort of non-productive framework. So a lot of the kind of smoke elements, etc., were sort of drawn from that. And then we wanted to pick up on a lot of the kind of environmental conditions of the site. So there's sort of smoke blowing, there's the wind flags, etc. And again, I think a lot of our kind of shared work in the past has picked up on these ideas of like loitering and kind of occupying a site for non-productive means. So these kind of earpieces allowed you to then kind of sort of lie down and listen to the site in a sort of non-productive manner. So.
Yeah. I think some of our initial ideas for the props and the objects which you saw within the scene that we kind of isolated on site were references to more traditional metric ways of surveying and quantifying land and measuring ecosystems. And we quite like the idea that we might create some contrast with the more performative elements of how we're interacting and responding to the instructions that Vic gave us, which were made in complete isolation to our experience of the site. And these kind of metric elements became almost obstacles to the performance that we were kind of listening to and interpreting.
Yeah, and I think just on that, we might be able to sort of send one of these audio files into the chat later for you to try at home, to also like try to relive these remote instructions and compare them to the reality of the site you're in, and explore that with sort of like the consciousness, you know, of you and your physical you. Yeah, and so maybe you can also start collecting some warm data.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Really inspiring. Shall we move on to food futures? Yeah, cool. Yeah, thanks everyone that's still with us. Feel free to keep on with the questions. Really appreciate it. We might not have time to answer them all today, but we'll put our personal details and our socials in the chat. So feel free, please. This is an opportunity for us to kind of expand our networks. And yeah, hopefully we can create networks and partnerships with you that are watching. So food futures. We have a question from Gilly. Where do you position yourselves on the shifting paradigms to changing rule spectrum? And has this position shifted along your individual projects?
I think it's a very big question, but I can start to answer it. So I think in my individual experience, I was involved quite a lot with our voluntary sector around food aid during the COVID crisis. And I guess being involved in that area where it's very, very material focused, just providing the food for the people that really, really need it, kind of led me to think that actually long term, we need to strive for system change in a way, which involves policy and involves climate action. And all of these very, very big topics. And I think a lot of the time, because the problems are so prominent, a lot of the time, the future thinking, planning way ahead into the future kind of gets lost in the immediate actions that need to be done. So I guess it's like finding the balance between thinking about the material and now, and how can we deal with the crisis now, but also projecting into the future. So I think that would be my take on this question. I don't know if anyone has anything to add.
I think from my perspective, I've been looking at ideas around green infrastructure in cities, and sort of the discourse at the moment is on revaluing the roles of nature within sort of urban ecological processes. And I think what underpinned, I think, our approach was prioritizing food and putting food at the center of these discourses. So it was the foundation of a counter regeneration strategy, which I think is what we tried to project in our future. And I think our project sort of contended that it would be of ecological, economic and social advantage for cities and countryside if kind of green infrastructure concepts embrace the subject of food. So again, food is this kind of central actor.
Yeah, and I think for me, I share both of the sentiments of Edmund and Gabby, but you know, thinking of the things at the top of the scale of mindsets and seeing the power of the mindset, seeing that itself. I've kind of been involved in activism. We've often used something called the iceberg model, which is about, we have these beliefs, which is what you can see, but what is hidden and what goes underneath that, and why do we believe a certain way? So for me, kind of mirroring what Gabby says about policy change, things that kind of exist on a broader spectrum, and how can policy start to affect and inform city planning, both from a grassroots level and from a local authority level. And I think when we speak about climate action, we have to see things from both of those scales. And I hope that's what our video is also representing. Moving on to the next question. There is a law from Philip Smith. There is a law that requires local authorities to have enough allotments to meet the needs of people. How do you define the needs of the people? Really good question.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't know if anyone wants to start.
I can. Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one, and you can look at that in terms of quantity. People need X, Y, and Z to survive and to live and to eat. But actually, there's another layer on top of that about our needs of connection and our needs of, you know, something that's not so quantifiable. Yeah, that's maybe how I'd answer that question.
Yeah, I think as well, the needs of, when it comes to needs, and I guess that the local policy set out to measure it, a lot of the time the problem is about the ways it's measured, and the engagement that happens, which is often not representative of those needs or the people. So maybe there is a collaboration with W.E.L Lab where we can use warm data to start measuring the actual needs of people, and people who are not able to come to public consultations or public events because, yeah, they work and they have jobs. Yeah.
I think if I can just say something on this as well, I think for a large city like London, an important factor is obviously the extreme pressure on land and the need to secure areas for food growing. So there's always this kind of constant tension ongoing in such a city. And I think this can easily translate to questions of productivity when discussing urban agriculture. like how many carrots are produced in a given space and how much water do they need and this kind of thing. I think what we try to capture in our video, and I think a view we share, is I think there can be a more nuanced definition of productivity that doesn't simply equate to quantifiables such as yield, but could refer to like social productivity, changes in behavior and health. I think that's something we are quite keen to emphasize. So I think the notion of productivity is complicated, and it raises questions about who produces for what and for whom as well. And yeah, I think for me at least, urban agriculture includes a kind of spectrum of initiatives, from kind of market gardens run as sort of business enterprises to community gardens, which is less about food production and more about production of social space. Yeah, I don't know. Hopefully that's answered your question, Philip.
That was great. Thanks, Edmund and Gabby. There's been some really interesting questions that's directed at the both of us and both our groups. I'm wondering if we move on to them. There's one from Will just before that though, to W.E.L. I like that acronym. If it's not too late for a question for W.E.L, it would be great to hear an elaboration about how warm data might be read in conjunction, how that collaboration might work. I think that means collaboration with us.
I think it's in collaboration or like read in conjunction with metric data. So it's this idea of, we're not saying down with metric data is bad. No, that's not the point. Metric data is incredibly useful, but it only allows things to be read within certain parameters, whereas warm data kind of blows up and expands those parameters and allows for much richer and deeper readings and listenings of translating landscapes or translating things which are beyond the human knowledge or human voice. So it's a way of sort of bringing the two in conjunction with each other, and through that you can sort of understand the sense of a place or understand the things living there a lot more. I don't know if anyone else wants to elaborate on that a bit more.
Yeah, I think, oh no, go ahead, Vic. I think it's kind of a completely different animal. I don't think they're either kind of mutually exclusive or necessarily have to be read together, but it's just two completely isolated way of kind of surveying the landscape, I guess. And perhaps, I don't know if the team might disagree with me with this, is kind of warm data collection at its very simplest is observation, and a kind of taking observation and taking time to monitor and really understand ecosystems in a variety of different ways is a really valuable tool, especially if you're working on a master plan where, you know, maybe 80% of the design team haven't even been to site. So it's just starting to maybe break down some of the rules and regulation, not rules, but maybe traditional ways of working that might dictate a form based on solely metric rather than a combination of both.
Cool, thank you. Okay, moving on to questions for both of us. So it's still free for all at this point. If you could show this work to anyone, who would be in your top 3 and why? That's from Maria. Thinking faces are on. Go for it, Chris.
I feel like I've been put on the spot.
Sorry,
well, we've been working a lot with the master plan team in Thamesmead, so it would be good to have an audience maybe with Peabody. I'm not sure what might come out of it, but it would definitely be an interesting discussion. Maybe some of the local residents of the site, literally off the top of my head, and maybe some of the people who live in Thamesmead, and then maybe the third resident is the landscape. Or the third.
Definitely the landscape. The
Yeah.
landscape needs to see itself reflected back.
Nice. Anyone else?
I would add environmentalists as well, because as we work with nature and human-made natural land, it's important. Like this is actually just the beginning, like creating awareness. But to spin the idea further for the next step, I think it's important to include biologists, environmentalists, as they know what's in there, what's on there, much more. They have like a very different like kind of sense of perception, and it would be like interesting to create like a discourse between landscape architects who are kind of, I don't want to say that architecture is very human-centered, but it is kind of, because we were thinking about us, like how to place social housing, more social housing. But it would be nice to like to extend collaboration and create like new cross disciplines by including people from different fields as well, and therefore like environmentalists, biologists, and soil specialists or so, and continuation, like I don't know the exact profession, but yeah, it's kind of way to open, like to create new cross disciplines is very important.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lynn. Anyone else? Let's move on. Lois, hi Lois. To both, how did the spatial choreography inform your research? It seems to open up a new language that other largely 2D formats can't.
I think for us it was an opportunity to be outside and work collaboratively. First of all, I think that this whole symposium meant quite a lot for us to actually work with other people, because during COVID and the pandemic, we've just been feeling a bit isolated. So I think being able to be in actual space, not on your computer all the time, was actually really liberating, and just being able to share our projects in a different way. So it's not exactly, maybe it doesn't exactly answer the question, but I think when we're gonna reflect on this time, I'm sure like these experiences, being on site together, would have informed our research. At the moment, it feels quite early to reflect on it personally.
But I think there was something about, oftentimes we would go to site without really anything prepared, and just, with our carts of cardboard and a camera and a rickety tripod and string, and just objects that were found around the house, and just kind of set up shots and try and recreate scenes. And that it's, that in itself was a form of research that was really instant. And I think because for us there was it kind of gave us more agency to create what we wanted in the allotment and in the garden at that time. And also there was interesting moments of the council coming in and using the site and various other plot holders. So it was a different form of research, rather than drawing the site 2D, or being able to experience it while being there was a form of research itself, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
I think
Yeah,
that's
sorry, Chris. No, go ahead, Ed.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just gonna underline that last point, that I think the generation of knowledge for us happened via the experiment, the kind of empirical situation and moment, and then its subsequent observation and reflection. And I think we tried to embrace that, even if it was a bit still quite difficult and sometimes a bit uncomfortable. But yeah, very, very enjoyable. Sorry, Chris.
I was going to say something quite similar. I think the serendipity of it is something that you don't get on a drawing board or in a computer, and the way you have to adapt. I know when we were filming, we had to adapt a lot to the rain. We had to set up tarps to cover our bags. We were covered in bugs. There are these constant things that are happening that you can't predict, that really start to inform your research, maybe in a way that you're not fully aware of at the time.
Also the snow.
And the snow.
No.
I feel like we all had a picnic in the snow at some point during the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, but I think that kind of sense of serendipity and the kind of uncontrolled encounter is really important, and something we picked up on or tried to implement into the piece. It's something you don't kind of you're not necessarily able to achieve through two-dimensional methods, where you have a set of instructions or scripts, and then you perform them on site, and they don't always meet the sort of observed qualities of the site. So there's these kind of moments where you're kind of making direct observations and then translating these kind of scripted instructions into the lived experience. And I think those kind of moments of disjoint between the kind of pre-composed idea of what an architect thinks about a site and then the kind of actual lived experience on the site is where you can really bring some kind of life into projects. And I think also in terms of there's this discourse which I think you'll see through a lot of the projects over the course of the next few days, where people are trying to bring in the voice of the non-human and of the landscapes and of nature. And I guess in my personal opinion, you're never truly going to be able to see through the eyes of another being or even another person. So you can only kind of contextualize your own experience within those things. And the performative methodology allows you to contextualize your own body within the experience of the site. So you can kind of perform these actions on site and experience the kind of motions of different natural kind of characters in play in that moment. And I think that's the only way that you can truly begin to kind of implement these non-human voices into a design process.
And I'd just like to add, we saw a wonderful example of that both in your film, but especially in the Hammer, the bus, and the film that went before us, and the fountain. Yeah, well done to that team. Amazing. Okay, I think we're at a time. But thank you so much for joining, for watching our films, for joining our live Q&A. We really hope that you are able to join the rest of Fumbling Futures. We have more weird and wonderful things to show you for the rest of the week on Wednesday and Thursday this evening. You can find all the details on the MArch CSM Instagram. And just a last final plug, the film that we created from Food Futures was created in The Plot, which is part of Grow Lewisham, a wider network of groups within the borough trying to address food inequalities. And we've recently just launched a crowdfunder and we're trying to raise money. So please, I'll put this in the chat, please donate what you can. If you can't, share it. We just really want to get the word out there about what we're doing. But yeah, for now, thank you so much. Have a great evening and we'll see you later in the week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.